Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. Matthew Dickerson. Tech Talk. Sit back and relax. It's time to talk technology.
Welcome, tinkerers. It's time to down tools and take yourself a well-earned break from the workshop. Refocus your minds and harvest some new ideas from a humble little podcast. It's time for some Tech Talk with Matthew Dickerson. And here he is, the man with the instruction manual. Welcome to the microphone, Matthew Dickerson.
Thank you very much. And it's an exhaustive instruction manual, isn't it? It's so big.
And it keeps growing.
And I'm a male, so I'm not meant to read instruction manuals. What am I doing?
No, just go by feel. No. Right. Instruction manuals have their place.
They do.
But only as a last resort.
Last resort. After you've watched YouTube videos and asked your friends, and finally, what's this thing? I'll look at that. Now, this week I've been quite intrigued by new economies. Different things happen in society, different things happen across the world, and suddenly you get a new economy that comes out of it.
Like so many things, economies evolve as well, don't they?
They do, that's exactly right. And we know with renewables, there's a whole new economy there, a whole green economy that's being born. One of the things I think is interesting is this whole low-altitude economy that we're seeing.
Low-altitude economy?
Yeah, we're seeing a little bit with drones, so we're getting deliveries with drones. We talked a little bit about that last week, but we're also seeing this low-altitude economy for delivery of people. So more and more places around the world are getting to the stage where they're going to have some type of taxi, some type of drone taxi that will deliver you around a busy city. And that economy is going to be worth billions of dollars before we know it.
The age of flying cars.
The age of flying cars.
We keep talking about the Jetsons.
Well, I keep getting a hard time by one of the regular radio segments I do about the hoverboard. Matt, when are you going to bring me the hoverboard? I want you to do an interview one day and say, finally, I've got the hoverboard. Well, I think the hoverboard is still some time away, but the flying cars and define cars, flying somethings with this low-altitude economy. I think that's not as far away as we think. Maybe not every household having one yet, not like the Jetsons, but maybe taxi services, maybe just that ability to get from A to B, maybe get to the airport and get into the city, that type of thing, or go from place to place within a busy, congested city rather than sitting at 10 or 20 kilometres an hour in a car. You're sitting just above everyone, but going a little bit faster than that.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what sort of regulations and rules have to come of that, because we'll need an international set of rules.
Hopefully, before we start seeing people falling from the air and going, we should have some rules for that.
When roads become 3D, yeah.
But keep that in mind. Keep that low-altitude economy in mind as things keep developing in that area. I think it's this whole exploding economy we'll see around that.
Well, I look forward to the first drone I see hovering over my head delivering pizza. Yeah.
Well, you can get with coffee now, and there have been some pizza deliveries, but not where we live yet.
Where we are yet.
That's right.
No, I'm looking forward to the first time I see it
in
my location. All right, well, before we begin today's episode, I might just do a bit of a scan of the running sheet. Now, I see we have an update on electric planes that will have the cynics searching for a new angle to come by. They found a new way to draw CO2 from the atmosphere in Iceland, and that sounds pretty cool. And we found a fun way for robots to get around, and they are having a ball, folks. But enough of this jibber-jabber. It's time to get this show rolling with our first story. Faster than a speeding bullet? Well, maybe not yet, but the bar for the fastest drone on the planet has just been raised a notch or two. So look out, you speeding bullets out there. Thanks to a backyard father and son team from South Africa. Matt, these things are fast. Do we know if they're delivering pizzas yet?
They're not delivering pizzas yet, but they would be warm when they got there because they'd be there so quickly. I want to actually go back a little bit and think about some of the inventors, the famous inventors of our past. And we look at people like Thomas Edison, Nikola Tesla, Alexander Graham Bell, maybe even James Watt. Mostly they started off as single tinkerers. Thomas Edison developed a big team behind him eventually, but
absolutely,
most of those people started off tinkering, having an idea. What can I do? What can I work? I've got this idea. I'll try that. I'll get in my workshop and I'll keep trying things and experiment. And so I love that just raw ingenuity, that raw inquisitiveness. And then I fast forward a bit and I think most innovation now is done by a huge R&D team, huge companies that have got great big budgets and they've got all these sophisticated tools. And I suppose I think of a Formula One team. Some of those have 1,500 staff. They've got dedicated wind tunnels. They've got computer modelling. So that just raw inquisitiveness, raw curiosity is almost gone from some of these big
Well, you
organisations.
still have to have that as the basis, but you've also got to have the resources to be able to play with stuff.
Yeah, and you're
Material
right.
science,
You've got to still be curious, haven't you? But
do.
then you've got to go and say, right, now let's go and get all this other stuff into action and make it happen. So what I love about this story is a father and son team had none of that.
Yeah.
Father and son team said, you know what, we should make a really fast quadcopter drone. How can we do that? We don't have all the resources of all these big companies, and there's consumer drone companies out there that have got huge resources.
Yeah,
They're making drones for the consumer world, so they've got all these testing facilities, they've got all these tools. Surely they could go and do it, but this father and son team said, no, we're going to have
And clearly none of those guys are thinking about, I need to make the fastest drone in the world.
supposedly not, but someone's got to. Someone's got to be the fastest, surely.
That's right.
So they set out, and the first thing they needed was a wind tunnel. They didn't have access to a wind tunnel. So they thought, what are we going to do with this? Well, they used their car as a wind tunnel. They made a model, just printed a 3D model of what they thought it would look like, and then they took it out for a drive on the road. I'm assuming Dad drove while the son, on a little stick, had the model out the window while they drove along. Now, I'm sure they didn't break the speed limit. I'm sure they only went on a country road at 100 kilometres an hour and then tested the wind flow.
What the speed limits are in South Africa?
Well, that's
besides
right.
South Africans.
That's right. So they did that testing, and then they got an idea of what model would work best. Now, what a basic, crude way to do some wind tunnel testing, but obviously you're still just trying to work out the airflow over an object. So fantastic. They worked out the best shape for that. Done. Then they started
I
designing.
wonder if they got the smoke operating over it.
No,
as
they
well.
did. Yeah,
They did?
Yeah,
They did all that?
because they had to do that to see
great.
how the wind would flow over the actual device. And and
Guys hanging out a whole body, like a whole torso out the window. Forget travelling at speed. What other dangers are there? Anyway,
I'm
just
hoping
getting
they had it
visual
on
image.
on a stick out there and a little thing there filming there. Maybe they enlisted one of their friends as well. But so that was their wind tunnel testing, was out the window of the car driving along the highway. Then they went, well, that's great. And so they used a 3D printer to do that and did different models so they got it right. Now we need to amp up, literally, the amount of current going through the motor. So in the old computer terms, I would have said they overclocked the motor. So they've effectively put more current through the motor than it can handle. And then the wiring. So when they started doing that, they found the wiring couldn't handle the current. So the wiring started catching on fire because there was too much current going through there.
Yeah, right.
So it wasn't even so much the batteries catching on fire, but they had to work out all these little bits and pieces that weren't normal for a drone. So boost the wiring up, increase the wiring gauge, obviously, to get more current going through without that catching on fire, make sure the batteries could handle it, make sure the motors could handle doing that as well, and then trying to get the angle of all that so that it would actually propel a quadcopter drone, obviously, is able to go up and down and go forward and back via some slight angles, but it's not really designed to shoot through the air at incredibly high speeds.
Yeah, right.
With all this, without the experimentation, or once all the experimentation was done and they've had a few little fires and they've had a few little things that didn't go quite the way they wanted it to go, they finally got to the point at the end of all this, and they've documented all this on a YouTube video if you want to watch it. They finally said, we're now ready to fly this, we're ready to fly it fast, and so they flew it fast. 480.23 kilometres an hour average speed.
That's not bad for a man-made object that's
Not
powering
bad.
itself.
Not bad for a father and son tinkerers, and I'm sure they've got some skills, but just tinkerers without a big laboratory behind them doing that. And as with anything, to get a good speed, so when you see anyone do any speed records, you go in one direction and then back in the other, so you eliminate wind being an advantage. So they obviously did a run up and a run back. They did that 4 times and they took their best 2 of those as such, so an up and a back time. But they didn't just go, hey everyone, look at this, 480 kilometres an hour. They actually went through a Guinness World Record process. And I've done Guinness World Records myself, and I know the ratification process they have. And even though sometimes some of the stuff that I've done has been more novelty records, they're still very thorough in what they do to make sure that if you've got that certificate, you know that it's legitimate. So they went through the process, they gave all the proof and evidence to Guinness World Records, and they said, yep, you qualify. There's your Guinness World Record for the fastest quadcopter drone in the world. Well done.
And they've thrown down the gauntlet, and we'll see if anyone else comes to the party.
Yeah, hello, companies like DJI, who make a lot of drones out there for consumer world. Go out there and see if you can have a crack at this. So,
I wonder if these guys have just created a bit of a job for themselves, or at least somewhat they become very hireable as a result.
You're probably right. I'm not sure if that was their intention, if they just want to have some fun. They want to do a bit of bonding. 3 months they spent doing it, so they obviously didn't just do it
Good
one
fun.
afternoon. Yeah, so good fun with your dad.
Yeah, driving around hanging out of a car window. Yeah.
But maybe they did want to get a job out of it, and I'm sure there would be some job offers out there for them because they've obviously showed a lot of ingenuity,
Yeah.
a lot of curiosity, and a lot of problem-solving techniques as well to get to that final solution. So go and have a look at it. It's Luke and Mike Bell are the father and son team, as you said, out of South Africa. I just think it's a pretty cool thing to do. And when you watch some of the videos, you see this little blip go past very quickly at 480 kilometres an hour. Obviously, you don't see it in the view for very long, but I just like the process. You can hear it, definitely you can hear it.
And that's called the Peregrine 2, I think, isn't it?
That's what they called it.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Here we go. Do you still have a box of floppy disks sitting out in the garage? Well, why? They're useless to almost everyone, except perhaps one eccentric Scandinavian musician for whom everything old is new again. Matt, how is it that an old box of 3.5-inch floppies have become music to this guy's ears?
Well, I'll talk more about that in a moment, but I actually have got a bit of advice for our listeners out there. If you've got some old floppy disks sitting around, they haven't been manufactured since about 2011. Go and find them. Make sure there's no valuable data on them. I'm not sure how you do that because you probably haven't got a computer that's got a floppy disk drive, but go out there and put them on eBay, put them on something to sell them because people are paying pretty good money for these because there's a dwindling supply across the world.
We had a box of them that I disposed of 2 years ago.
Oh, that was probably $10,000 you just threw away. I'm not sure if they're worth that much, but I even remember some old computer programs like Microsoft Office, for example. I think that came on about 30 floppy disks, and it was a job and a half. We used to have some of our junior staff in our organisation. Right, this customer wants Microsoft Office. Your job is to sit there, put disk 1 in. Wait till it says disk 2. Take it out. Don't get it wrong. Don't go and have a coffee break halfway because if it stops, it might not start again. It was a laborious job. Thank goodness when CDs and DVDs came along. But the old floppy disk, if we go back a little bit in history, 1971, the first 8-inch floppy disk came out, 80 kilobytes it stored. Now, I must admit, I don't remember the 8-inch floppy. I didn't ever have any interaction with the 8-inch floppy because at 1971 I wasn't old enough to do anything with floppy disks. The one that I first start to remember was the 5.25-inch floppy disk, which came out in 1976.
And that was big black sort of cardboard.
It was a plastic, but and that was floppy. The 8-inch floppy was flexible. The 5.25-inch was flexible as well. Yeah. So 1976, and they eventually, when they got to double-sided high density, they were eventually 1.2 megabytes. But I remember my first interaction with those floppies was I worked out that you'd put them in and you'd use it, and there was a little piece cut out, a little kind of square cut out of one side that was the read-only part, so you'd cover that up if you wanted to be read-only, so you'd protect the data. But I worked out if I did a little piece cut out on the other side, I could actually take that floppy disk out, turn it upside down, and put it in again, so I could double the amount of storage on that floppy disk. So it was actually double-sided before it was double-sided. So I remember doing that with those original floppy disks. I went, hey, I've got double the amount of storage here. I can turn it upside down. They eventually came out that the drives themselves and the disks were double-sided, so you put it in one and it would read both sides. So that was where we got to 1.2 megs. And then in 1982, Sony made a huge breakthrough. They went to the 3.5-inch floppy disk, which confused everyone because it was now hard plastic. And those hard plastic floppy disks were confusing because it was hard plastic but called floppy disk still. They were 3.5-inch instead of 5.25, so they reduced in size, and they jumped up all the way to 1.44 megabytes.
Yeah, I remember. I was
hardly seemed like it was worth it going from 1.2 megs to 1.44. This is a whole new technology, and 1.44. Now, that was, again, double-sided high density. They did actually get to extended density, which was 2.88 megabytes.
But that 1.44 one, that was the one that they now model the save symbol off, yeah?
Well, I've heard people say that someone's found an old floppy disk in a drawer of their parents and they've gone, hey, why is there a save symbol in my dad's drawer? And you're right, that's exactly what the save symbol looks like, is the old floppy disk. So that 1.44 meg, released in 1982, we've gone so far past that now. We've obviously got compact discs, we've got memory sticks, we've got just things stored in the cloud, download. So who in their right mind would still be using floppy disks? Yeah. And the answer is a fair few people, believe it or not, which is why I'm saying pull them out and start using them. So there's one example of that gentleman in Norway that you were referencing there who likes to store sound samples on floppy disks. Now, there's there's not big sound samples. You're not storing a whole song. 1.44 megs is not enough for a high-quality MP3, for example. But he does concerts. He does music concerts as a DJ where it's part of his whole show, where he pulls out these various floppy disks, all different coloured, all different symbols on them, and puts them into his deck. I don't know whether it's all for show or it's real, but presumably it's for real, and plays these different sound samples off this and almost, look at this, I'm using this old nostalgia technology to produce these modern sounds. So they're still good. 1.44 megs, is that, if that's all you need, there's still digital storage. They're still able to store it for a long period of time. So there's still lots of advantages. It's just not much data on there is the big problem with it.
Well, I mean, you've got the whirring of the motor and the buzzing and the clicking that happened with it as well. I wonder if that's part of the music too.
It could be. I think it's all part of the show. But you still do use, believe it or not, some floppies for some other important things. So any Boeing 747s out there, and I think most 747s are now freight rather than transport, but there's still probably a couple of hundred in service across the world. When you want to update any navigation or any avionics software on there, they still need a 1.44 meg, 3.5-inch floppy disk. And when you think about it, the 747s came out late 60s, early 70s, so that would have been pretty advanced for them to have a 1.44 meg drive is part of the dash to look at this modern technology. You can transfer this data via this new fandangled floppy disk drive we've got here. So that's still the case now. So technicians still talk about the fact they still need to keep some 1.44 meg floppies. They've still got to have a computer to transfer the data to and then take it across. Literally walk across. We used to call it sneaker wear. You'd walk across with your sneakers on and plug it in to the dash of the 747 and update this huge plane with that. The other one that I thought was absolutely hilarious was the San Francisco Municipal Transport Agency's Metro requires a daily floppy disk to start its, get ready, automatic train control system. So its automatic train control system needs a floppy disk to get it going each day. If that floppy disk fails, then I guess the automatic system doesn't work anymore.
And nobody commutes.
No, that's right, nobody commutes. So you might think they're out of date. I do think they are out of date, but they actually served a job or served a purpose, and they still serve that same purpose as long as you only need a little tiny bit of space. But if you've got some out there, pull them out, put them on eBay, get rid of them, and you'll get some money for them.
So I'm just visualising this guy who's in control of the San Francisco, what is it, the automated train service?
Yep.
And he's probably about 80, and he liked the technology when it came along. It was brand new, and he wasn't changing for anybody.
I've got this new technology, and I'm sticking with it. That's right.
It's still good, I tell you. Battery-powered flight may get a little nudge thanks to the modern wonders of hydrogen. We know that weight-to-power ratios have been somewhat of a limiting factor for electric aircraft to this point, but the folks at AMSL Aero, that's a little Aussie startup, reckon that they're on the way to a revolution in the skies. Matt, how's this all panning out?
I'm actually pretty familiar with this company because I've seen their aircraft in testing.
I think we've done a story on them before as well.
We might have had a little story.
Batteries, yeah.
Yeah, now, and it's progressed from where we've last talked about them. And when we've talked about them before, and possibly in terms of just physically seeing them, what I've seen is the device, the aircraft they've got, has been tethered to the ground via cables that allow it to take off and go maybe a metre or so off the ground, and that's it. So if something goes wrong, it doesn't go crazy and land on someone's house somewhere.
Yeah.
So that testing has been done. And these particular aircraft, they're quite clever in that they've got a takeoff process like a quadcopter. So they've got 8 motors on 2 wing structures that takes off vertically. And then once it's in the air to fly, those motors turn horizontally and then they're wings. So they fly horizontally because you use a lot of power in a quadcopter to keep it off the ground, and then you need some power to move it forward. Whereas, as we know, when you've got an aircraft moving forward, what's keeping it off the ground is actually the movement of air over the wing. So you're not wasting energy to keep it above the ground, if you like. So they like the idea of vertical takeoff, so a bit like the old Harrier jump jet. It can vertically take off and then flies like a normal plane. So that's very clever. They've been working on this with batteries for some time. That's the work they've been doing so far. They've got to the stage now where they believe they can fly one of these about 200 kilometres in terms of range with batteries. And they've got a few instances where this will be used. Aeromedical retrieval is one of them. You take a Royal Flying Doctor Service, for example. You don't need to land on an old bush runway or on a highway somewhere and then get the patient transported from the accident to the plane and then back to an airport and then back to a hospital.
You need someone's backyard that's big enough.
Yeah, even beside the road, a lot of these are road accidents beside the road, someone's backyard, whatever, land there, put them straight in, and then because it can land like a helicopter, it can land at a helipad at a hospital. So you're basically straight to where you need to go. They've actually got one commercial order already to deliver these by 2027. So we're not talking about a long way into the future. And again, initially these will be aeromedical retrieval, but also used for that low altitude economy I talked about before, small cabins at this stage with people flying them, but maybe they'll get to autonomous at some stage. But the big breakthrough they're making now is going hydrogen. And that's the difference, because once they step over from electric only with batteries to go to hydrogen, you're talking about 200-kilometre range becomes 1,000-kilometre range.
Much more practical.
And that's starting to get pretty attractive. Then you start to talk about small hops around in one country become pretty sensible. So when you start to talk about regional locations feeding into a capital city, whether that be in Sydney, regional New South Wales into Sydney, or regional Victoria into Melbourne, for example, or many areas around Queensland going into Brisbane, that becomes much more practical to do that. I still think we're a long way away from Sydney, LA, Sydney to London, some of those large flights. Jet fuel will probably be used for those for a long time because it's just such an energy-dense way of storing that energy to flow through that whole flight. But when we start to talk about hydrogen, that's right. So these sort of short hops, I think that's where it'll be really efficient. They've been doing all their testing with electric at this stage because it's there, it's easy. But more importantly, the hydrogen basically is still an electric plane. All that's happening is the hydrogen's being converted to electricity to power that plane.
Well, I wonder, to what degree we might have people who live on very remote stations and whatnot, 1,000 kilometres away from a centre like Dubbo that might have this sort of technology, whether or not they might have their own hydrogen storage as a possibility, or their own way of producing hydrogen.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And we know there's various ways to produce green hydrogen now. So if you were on a remote station, I'm talking about remote Queensland, for example, some of those huge cattle stations, I don't see a problem with you having some sort of renewable power, whether that be some solar panels, maybe even a small wind turbine that actually produces green hydrogen for you to power your commuter, your little commuter that you jump into, you and your kids jump in and off you go to school or duck into Brisbane to do the shopping, whatever it might be. This is a revolutionary process that's occurring here, and we're talking about now in the near future, say 2027, they've got commercial orders where they're meant to deliver these by 2027. So we think they'll be flying by 2027. Now, just the fact you've got commercial orders doesn't mean it's always going to be delivered upon, but they've got a pretty good target there, and obviously they think they can meet some of these targets.
So eyes in the sky in 2027, and you might just see one of these really quiet little zippy planes flying over the top of your head in low altitude. Mercedes is trimming down its EV fleet. Now, they're not cutting production, anything but they are rejigging the motors to a lighter and more powerful design. So, Matt, things are hotting up again in the EV stakes. What's going in the motor zone?
Well, this is all about radial flux versus axial flux.
I'm already in. You had me at flux.
That's right.
Someone's flux capacitor.
Someone's watched too much of Back to the Future, definitely. So radial flux motors is where the magnetic field is perpendicular to the axis of rotation. Mm-hmm. Axial flux, it's parallel to the axis of rotation. And you'd say, well, big deal. What's that matter? This is just two different designs of electric motor, which you're right to a certain extent, but axial flux motors are lighter, smaller, and produce more torque. So you say, well, that's all good. Why are we using radial flux motors? Why aren't we using axial flux motors? Well, so far in the past, axial flux have been more expensive to produce. So that's been a downside. So when you're trying to mass-produce cars at a reasonable price, then you're trying to cut some costs wherever you can because EVs are expensive anyway. But Mercedes-Benz aren't known for making cheap cars. They're known for making really good cars. Yeah. So they've actually jumped into this, and what they've done is they've bought a company called YASA. Now, YASA was developed by a gentleman named Tim Woolmer, who developed this concept of these motors and then the company while he's doing his PhD at Oxford way back in 2009. So what a great example of someone studying, working through, coming up with a concept for their thesis and then going, well, you know what, this is so good. Not only am I going to get my PhD out of it, I'm going to go and start a company. I don't know how much they paid him for YASA. I'm not sure how many other investors were involved, but I don't imagine that Mercedes-Benz would have paid a few pittance for this. I imagine he made a couple of dollars out of it, and good luck to him. What they've done is they've acquired YASA because they want to start producing motors for their AMG EA cars. So they're basically their performance range of cars. And this is pretty exciting. We've seen axial flux motors used by some other companies like Lamborghini, McLaren and Ferrari. So we're talking about high-end performance vehicles here. So once Mercedes-Benz gets into the game as well, again, producing their AMG cars, then what that starts to mean is more production, more research from a company the size of Mercedes. And who knows, before we know it, we might see more axial flux motors come down in price, better production methods. They might become mainstream, or maybe there'll be more development on radial flux motors. Either way, I don't care because they're going to get better.
It just sounds good every way. Yeah.
It does, that's right. And once Mercedes jumps into this game as well, I think some companies like Mercedes are going, we've missed the boat a little bit here. We thought that Tesla was a bit of a startup, but it seems to have changed the world a little bit, damn it. So we better start catching up. And we know a few companies out there trying to catch up to Tesla. And in all fairness, BYD, who I think Elon Musk dismissed at one stage saying that they would never make it, BYD have now overtaken Tesla in terms of sheer production volume. So well done, BYD. But the competition's hotting up across the world. So what we think at the moment is just a bit of a one-off and a bit unusual, and someone sees a friend with an EV and they go, hey, there's that strange friend with an EV. It's getting to the stage not too far down the track where it's going to be mainstream.
Yeah, very normal.
Yeah, and Mercedes is going to help that happen because some people that I know that wouldn't buy a Tesla because they don't like the idea of that new fandangled brand, they see something like a Mercedes and they say,
a bit more trust in it.
I know that. I've owned a Mercedes before. They've been around for 100 years. Maybe I'm going to go that EV now. Even though it might not be as good technically, they have more trust in that brand, which is fine, whatever it takes you to make a decision to buy. But this is where we're going now with this whole mainstream. So they're catching up. There's a lot of challenges there for Tesla being out in front, a lot of challenges there from a technical perspective, but this is what makes the world a better place, competition.
For sure. In the race to reduce atmospheric carbon dioxide, there have been a whole bunch of solutions thrown into the mix. Planting trees is the obvious one. Seeding the ocean with vast algal blooms is another. But in Iceland, they're trying to literally suck the stuff out of the air by direct air capture, or DAC for the cool kids. Matt, how does all this work?
Well, it works. I'll get to how it works in a moment from a chemical perspective, but I'm a little bit worried about this because if people see that we can just suck some CO2 out of the air, well, who cares about making any change with climate change? Just keep spitting out that CO2, keep burning coal, keep burning your petrol in your petrol cars, and we'll just suck it all out because we've developed that technology. So I'm a little bit concerned that the messaging might be wrong there. I hope it isn't, because the messaging here from these companies is we still should keep reducing our production of CO2, but because we've gone so far, we probably need to do something to get rid of the CO2 that's in the air as well. And that's exactly where they're going. So that's my little rant for a moment.
But my guess is it's probably a bit energy heavy, this method.
Well, presumably they're all using renewable energy to run the
that's
processes.
Right. But in Iceland, you've got the value of geothermal, like an endless supply of geothermal power.
Yeah.
So they've got a big advantage. Maybe they'll become the ones who save the planet.
Maybe. And if they charge the rest of the planet, the rest of the people on the planet lots of money to do it, good luck to them, because someone's going to have to pay to help save the planet. So basically, you pull air through fans, so you've got to have electricity to run those fans, obviously. You pull air through fans, and the CO2 is captured via chemical filters. So basically, the CO2 reacts with minerals in these filters to form calcium carbonate. So basically, you turn the gas into a rock, and then presumably you would either leave it in a rock or you'd bury that rock somewhere. Once it's in that rock, though, that's taken it out of the atmosphere. So
right.
I'm
just
assuming
got to protect it from any acidic environment, because that'll just release the carbon dioxide again.
Right. So, and I'm assuming that once it's in that solid form, that rock form, keeping away from any acidic environment, it should stay in that rock form for
We do a
every
pretty
day.
good job with the concrete that we've got, so I think we'll be fine, yeah?
Yeah, that's right. So that's the process, if you like. But for people that do want to just keep burning their coal, we've got a long way to go. So this particular one set up in Iceland has got a nickname of Mammoth, is what they're calling it, presumably because it's pretty big. I'm not sure if there's anything to do with any woolly creatures there as well, but basically that's what they've called it. And it's set, this one particular device is set to capture 36,000 tonnes of carbon annually. So you go, oh, that's pretty good, 36,000 tonnes, well done. But let's put that in perspective. That's about the equivalent of 8,000 cars.
Oh, right.
We've got 1.4 billion cars in the planet or on the planet today. So this one...
We're going to need a couple more mammoths.
That's right. We're going to need a few mammoths, aren't we? So if we keep going as we are at the moment, don't change what we're doing, we're currently producing from fossil fuel usage about 35 billion tonnes. And the International Energy Agency says that if we get enough DACs going, then maybe we could get to 70 million tonnes of CO2 removed by 2030. So just those two numbers, we're producing 35 billion tonnes. We might be able to remove 70 million tonnes. So a fairly big factor of difference there.
Absolutely.
So keep on with your EVs, keep going down the path of reducing the amount of CO2 we're using, but this might be a solution to try and reduce what's already in the air. And there's different people working on different things around the world. There's different ones. So Climeworks is the one we're talking about here in Iceland. There's another one called 1.5, another one called Carbon Engineering in North America. One of those has got some backing by Bill Gates. So there's some serious money going behind these, but it does cost a lot. For example, Climeworks is saying that at the moment to remove the CO2 from the air, the 36,000 tonnes they're aiming for, $1,000 per tonne, US $1,000 per tonne. They're hoping to get that down to basically under US $100 per tonne, but it's still expensive. So it still makes more sense to not produce it in the first place.
Yes.
But in the meantime, here's another part of a solution.
In a modern social revolution, AI has taken on a number of personas. It's become a research assistant, a therapist, a fitness instructor, and a mentor. In what could only be described as a virtual twist in the relationship, though, one imaginative individual has tested out an AI bot for its value as a potential friend. Matt, there's so much to say about this, but I'm going to back up and get some details first.
So, an interesting little question for you without notice. How many friends, and friends is probably a pretty strong word, friends/good acquaintances would you interact with in a normal month of
we're
your
going to get
life?
into this Dunham factor, aren't we? We've talked about this
We
before,
have,
too.
yeah.
Yeah, in a normal month, geez, that's interesting because you got your workplace, and I've got quite a busy workplace.
Yeah.
I don't know how to estimate that. And I keep coming back to that Dunham factor. There's probably about 15 people that I can, maintain a pretty close, good relationship with. And then outside of that, there's probably 50, 100, 200 other people that I interact with on a regular basis.
Yeah, so in a normal month, it might be 15 in terms of, and again, I suppose I'm going friends here because you run into people and in your environment, obviously there's lots of people you interact with. Hi, how you going? Have a nice day. But I kind of have my loose definition of a friend is I drive electric vehicles that don't have spare tyres. If ever I did get a flat tyre on the side of the road, how many people could I ring and say, can you come and pick me up because I've got a car broken down the side of the road and I can't get somewhere?
How many people would go, suck eggs, you shouldn't have driven that car?
That's exactly right. I told you, why did you have a spare tyre? So that when you start to think about that solution there, that narrows it down pretty quickly. So this particular gentleman...
And Facebook's no guide to judge how many friends you actually have.
You mean I haven't got 28,000 friends? If I put a post out and said, I've got a flat tire on the side of the road, who can help me? How many responses do you reckon I'd get? Not many. Not from that.
I'd be there for you, man.
Yeah,
thanks.
That's good. Okay, James, I'll add him to the one.
I'll give you one of the 4 on my car.
Thanks. Then you'd have to ring me for me to come and pick you up. Right. So this particular gentleman said, I'm going to pretend that I've got no other friends and I'm just going to have AI friends for a month.
Is that his excuse?
Maybe.
I'm just pretending?
That's right. No one else would talk to him. He rang apparently all his friends on the side of the road. No one would come and help him. So
I'm going to find an AI friend.
He came up with 18 AI companions. So, and I started to think about
18 different companions.
Correct. Yeah, that's right. And that's what I started to think about. would I interact with 18 friends, in inverted commas, in a month? And I reckon you'd probably get to around that 10 to 15 pretty easily each month of people that you would interact with that you'd call a friend. So 18, yep, that's a reasonable number. And he had different personas that he assigned these. So he had one that might be someone that he would go to when he felt sad, a therapist type friend, and another one that was a mentor. Hey, need some advice around this. Someone that helped him with his fitness. I'm really trying to get that next level. What should I do next? So all these type of things. And he basically tried to treat them as real friends and essentially cut off any access to his normal friends for the month. So this was the experiment, the social experiment that he did. And he actually, as he went through it all, he found that it wasn't too bad. They actually were pretty good in terms of advice. He'd actually say, what do you think of this outfit I'm wearing? Do you think I should wear blues with greens? Like all sorts of things you might normally ask a friend. What about...
Were they asking him stuff?
I don't know if it was two-way interaction. I think it was more a one-way interaction. Did it help him alleviate loneliness? Yes, absolutely. Without a doubt. He said he felt less lonely as he did this. Is there any value in this long term? He knew there was a 1 month experiment. So he knew there was an end to this, self-imposed. It wasn't anything external. He could stop at any time. But he said, for 1 month, I'm going to do this. But he really started to question whether or not this would be good for people long term, people in an aged care facility, people that have lost their family, people that might have had...
Loneliness is an epidemic thing. And when I first looked at this story, I had a whole lot of jokes running through my head. And I thought, whoa, back, Sonny. Because it's a real thing.
It's a real thing, that's right.
And what happens when you're interacting with a friend in your brain, the neurological connections and stuff like that, there's no reason why that needs a real human.
If you don't know the difference, if you're getting an answer back from someone, hi, I just had a bad day at work. What do you think about this? Oh, don't worry about it, Matthew. It's all okay. Oh, I feel better now. If that text came back from an AI or a person, as long as it makes me feel better, then who cares? And I think that was his point at the end of all this. He actually concluded after this experiment that essentially he prefers real people. Okay, good. You know, the human race is safe still, but if you didn't have a choice, he said it wasn't actually too bad. So I am thinking about those people who are lonely, and some people get a dog, and some people sit there and do jigsaw puzzles, and some people sit there and say, who can I interact with? Well, interacting with some of these tools, and I'll throw a few names out there. There's apps like Nomi, Kindroid, Replika, spelt with a K, R-E-P-L-I-K-A. There are apps like that where you can actually go along and they can be companions. You'll pay $6 a month, maybe up to $16 a month. So not that expensive for you to have someone in an AI world that is a companion for you. So it's worthwhile just playing around with just to see how real these interactions are, because they're learning natural language from humans. So the reactions that they get to various things are normal human-like reactions. I don't think they're going to come up with great solutions to problems. I don't think they're going to change the world, but they're going to give you standard responses that you expect to get most of the time, which is where they're learning their responses from. So
that feeling of completion when you've got people around you that contribute to your life,
and validation too. There might be things where you might be saying, oh, I'm not sure about this, I'm a bit nervous, I'm about to start a new job, and someone just says, it's okay, just go and start talking to people. Oh, thanks, I feel a bit better now. That's fine. If that's what it takes, that's what it takes. So fascinating experiment. I love the fact that people are out there. I wouldn't do it. I don't have the time to do it, but I wouldn't be willing to go and cut off my friends for a month and just be AI friended for a month. But I love the fact that some people out there are doing it. So well done.
Amazing. Now, I love the stories that we do that bring out the wow factor, and I reckon this is one of them. Now, we're all familiar with robots that get around on wheels, some on tracks, some on legs. The Imagineers at Lucasfilm brought us BB-8 and it rolled around on a single ball. That was cool. So this is becoming a new thing. Mobility for robots on a single ball looks like it could be something of a winner. Matt, cruising around on a ball looks good in a movie, but it's becoming a practicality.
Why and how? This just seems crazy to me. Who thought of this, apart from in the movies?
Well, yeah, and so BB-8, you know, if those people who have seen The Phantom Menace or whatever, it was a short, stumpy little thing. But I was having a look at a video of this, and this is a tall thing that gets around on a single ball. And
one of the presents we got for one of my children one Christmas was a little BB-8 toy.
Yeah.
And it was cool.
Yeah.
And I was watching it and looking at the technology, and I went, this is a really cool little thing, which was great running around at Christmas Day in the lounge room or whatever. But I would never have thought of making a full-sized, normal sort of height-ish robot out of it. A bit the same as a Segway. The idea of putting two wheels side by side and making them balance, that's a crazy idea. But wow, what a cool thing the Segway is. And this is a bit the same. Where
Have you ever used a Segway?
Oh, absolutely. I've done lots of stuff on Segways.
I'm a Segway virgin.
Oh, really? No. At first, I had to go on one when they first came out. I was in America at a conference, and there was someone there who was just showing off this cool thing. I went, can I have a go? He said, no, we can't let anyone have a go because you've got to do this test or license or whatever. I finally convinced him to let me have a go. And I don't know why you've got all this carry-on because you stand on it and it just works. It's cool. But now I've done tours around Paris on them and various tours around cities. They are cool. Like, it's a good way to get a tour guide around a city, but they're really cool. So anyway, off the track slightly.
But yeah, so this is a Segway, but working in multiple dimensions.
Well, it's a Segway with a single ball. Like, why would you do that? Why would you think about that? And the reason they did it is because apparently you can make someone or make a robot smoother with a single ball than on normal wheels. And they're using this specifically to push wheelchairs so that if someone is in a wheelchair, needs to be pushed around, can't always rely on a human. And we know this is a huge area for robotics in aged care facilities. We can't get enough aged care workers. We need skilled aged care workers. You don't necessarily need high skills to be able to push a wheelchair around, but someone needs to be able to push a wheelchair around in some aged care facilities. So this is designed specifically to push wheelchairs, to push them smoothly, to get them around where the ground is already smooth.
And I reckon that's just the first job.
The first job, that's right.
We'll then find people go, we could also use this for...
Yeah, because apparently they're very energy efficient. And they're very smooth. So if you need anywhere where you've got a robot to get around that needs to be energy efficient and smooth, which let's face it, that's lots of places, then this is the robot to go to.
Carrying around trays of food. Yeah, when you've been playing a game of Monopoly or doing a jigsaw puzzle or whatever, and you need to move that board, that's a really tricky thing.
There we go. So here is the moving...
This could be a table.
Jigsaw. Moving well, there you go.
And then you need to move the whole table. It's just move the table.
So it's a table on a ball. And so then when it needs to move, it can move really smoothly. I love it.
All right, do it.
My next jigsaw is going on this because jigsaws, it's a normal Dickerson thing we do.
It gets set up on a dining room table and then you've got to eat your dinner. So
well, you've got to slide it off there. And I know they make jigsaw mats where you can roll it up. We often slide it off when we put it aside. And
even jigsaw mats have got problems.
They do because you unroll it and sometimes that piece that took forever to find is now fallen out. So,
where'd it go?
Yeah, so there we go. Folks, you've heard it here first because it hasn't happened yet. A jigsaw/Monopoly board robot with a spherical ball as its base.
And what's its name? It's got a Ballbot or something, isn't
Ballbot is what they've called it. Yeah, they probably could have something.
Super stable. You can bump it and it doesn't tip over.
You need Ballbot. Done.
And adding to our theme of robotics comes this story of the indestructible. Of course, for truly dangerous jobs where the risk of injuries to humans is real, this is where robotics comes into its own. If there's a chance that when someone goes wrong, there'll be a finger lost or a hand crushed, in 2024 it probably should not even be option C or D. But so many jobs require that human touch, detecting sensitive pressure requirements with our grip, while maintaining surety with strength. It's a big challenge if you're designing robots. But Matt, it looks like robotic hand technology is making some big progress.
Making big progress. So this is designed by the UK-based Shadow Robot Company. And in particular, they wanted to use it for AI training and specifically the Google Deepmind robotic experiments. So there's a specific purpose for it. But you're right, the combination of having strength and sensitive touch, we're pretty clever as humans, and our fingernails play a big part in our sensitive touch on our hands.
And your little finger as well, believe it or not.
All of that. So that's all clever. But again, we're a bit fragile, aren't we? We get a bit of a hit with a hammer.
Broken bones.
Things drop on top of us and ligaments and bones. So that's not great. So this robotic hand seems to be different to many others or most others I've found in a few things. The first thing is it's got lots of sensors, hundreds of sensors on the fingertips so that it can detect things like how hard an object is and the shape just by the slight deformation of the silicon skin of the hand. When I say hand, it's actually 3 fingers. So it's not a 5-fingered hand, 3 fingers. So with those 3 fingers, that's enough to be able to pick things up, but it can detect those things with the silicon shape. Now, it can just do a little tiny fingertip pinch of as low as 10 newtons. Now, if you think about, say, 1 Newton, I would normally say would be the amount of force I'd need to lift up an apple. So 10 Newtons is not a lot of force, so we think of robotics as being very strong, but we want to be able to sometimes just pick up something softly. So we want to be able to pick up a grape or a strawberry without squeezing it and it all squeezes out. This is sensitive enough to be able to pick up something like a piece of fruit without crushing it and detecting how hard it is, but also if it needed to pick up something that was much heavier or use its strength, it could do that as well.
Yeah, amazing.
The other cool part about it is it can handle abuse, not you ugly hand, what are you doing?
You've only got 3 fingers.
That's right. You call yourself a hand? You're only 3/5 of a hand. It's able to handle things that are dropped on it, things that are hitting it, and the individual fingers are replaceable. So if it did get hit hard enough by something that did actually break it, you just pop out one of those fingers and just pop in another finger, a new one, and away you go again. The idea here is that there are a whole range of different thought experiments that Deepmind is coming up with using robotic hands. Well, let's go and use something to actually see if it can actually do these things and be useful in these things as well. We are getting closer and closer, James, to having my robot around the house. Once it can pick up clothes and do the dishwashing and all the things I want to do.
I'll tell you what else we're getting closer to. We've given robotics their own mind, so we've developed AI, and now we're making them more and more indestructible. We've seen this movie, haven't we?
You see a problem here, obviously. Yeah, so there's more development happening here. Keep an eye out for that, and definitely an eye out for it if things are going the way you think they might be going.
That's right. People around the globe were given a bit of a treat recently with auroras in the evening sky, creating upper atmospheric light shows so much further away from the poles than we normally see. And it was all down to a coronal mass ejection, or at least a number of them. Yes, folks, when the sun burps, the disco lights fire up in the sky. It was pretty spectacular, but caused mayhem for farmers in the US, Matt.
It has, and this is one we can't blame on climate change, isn't it? We can't say this.
Or conspiracy theories.
That's right. This is the sun doing what the sun does, which it does every now and again, but this has been the biggest geomagnetic storm in the last 20 years. And when you think about our reliance on technology today compared to 20 years ago, and in particular GPS systems, global positioning systems, that doesn't sound right, in particular GPSs, then you've got a problem with, in particular, farmers. Now, farmers rely on their GPS to sow their crop in very accurate rows and make sure they're not oversowing or missing rows. When they've got their GPS centimetres accurate, that's fine. That all works fantastically. When you get some solar flares, when you get a geomagnetic storm, suddenly your centimetre precision might be half a metre, might be a metre out, which probably isn't going to affect you when you put in a location in your GPS on your phone or in your car to take you down to some location. You might get the house next door or a couple of metres away from it, not that big a deal. You'll still get there. But when you're sowing a crop, that's a bit different. So John Deere actually released a notification to say their real-time kinematic system, RTK systems, were affected, and that compromised the ability to plant with that centimetre precision. So it was big enough that it wasn't just some farmers noticed a bit of a problem, that John Deere themselves actually said, no, this is a problem. Obviously not so much of a problem at harvest time. Obviously, when they're harvesting, they still do like to do accurately. It does use a bit more fuel if you don't go as accurately, but sowing the crop is when you really need that to be absolutely accurate. It just gives us an idea of how much we rely on GPS now compared to 20 years ago. 20 years ago, if there was a geomagnetic storm, you'd go, gee, that looks pretty, and that's probably it. Maybe you made a phone call 20 years ago and it didn't get through as well as you thought it would and you forgot about it. It wasn't that big a deal. But now, so much of our communication systems, so much of our satellite systems, and that's a lot of the things that are affected here as satellite systems, so much of that is being affected. So I'm sure our listeners over the last few weeks have noticed some funny things happening with telecommunications, maybe slow telecommunications, maybe internet slow, maybe just GPS out a little bit. That's all down to the sun, as you say, having a bit of a burp.
Having a bit of a burp. Yeah, look, and it makes me also think about, well, apparently we're due for another magnetic pole reversal. So every now and then the North and South poles swap over on the Earth. And we've survived, humans have survived through this in the past a number of times. However, we've never had to deal with the amount of electronics and technology before.
Yeah.
So the last polar reversal was, I don't know, was it 10,000, 30,000 years ago, but it was in the tens of thousands of years ago. Yeah, but we never had electronics at that stage.
Yeah, and my understanding of that is that when it does happen, it's a build up and then it actually just flips. So it's not as if it's a slow, gradual change over and it slowly changes and then it goes back in the other direction. When it does flip, it tends to flip.
But it's the magnetic field that's protecting us from cosmic radiation, so even with that flip, that quick flip. Is it a super quick flip, or is it a couple of days? Is it a week? Is it a month? That it actually takes to flip. But it'll be very interesting to see.
That's right.
Anyway, that's all we have for today, folks. Break time is over, and it's time for you to get back to work. Quick sticks. Just jokes. You've got another couple of hours to waste diddling around on your phone first. So thanks for another cracking tech talk there, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. It's one of those things I love. The bells over in South Africa, and I just keep thinking, what can I go and do that looks similar to that? And I haven't come up with it yet, but I love the ingenuity. I want to go and tinker with something now.
Just
got me in a
get
tinkering mood.
A 3D printer for starters.
Well, start printing lots of cool things out, not Lego pieces, some different things out, and go from there.
Well, there's some cool homework coming out of today's episode, folks. Don't forget to jump online and check out videos of dancing ballbots, the Peregrine 2 drone that we were just talking about, and the Deepmind's robotic hand. Very cool. Thanks for tuning in once again. It's a pleasure to bring you an episode of Tech Talk with Matthew Dickinson each week. Homegrown here in the central western New South Wales. Enhanced by renewable energy sources and powered by EV technology all the way. I'm James Eddy, signing off for now, but looking forward to next week when we can catch up with you again for another top-up of all the latest news from the world of science and technology. In the meantime, take care and we'll see you then. Figuratively speaking.